Roundup, we've all been familiar with the fact that the President in early January, late December, appointed a sustainability task team, and the chair of the task team was Professor Anton Eberhard, who is well known in energy circles, both here and overseas, and he's the real expert, amongst others. There's lots of fake experts that are walking around at the moment as well. So I'm going to give him a short opportunity to explain some of their findings, but to underline the fact that their report is not completed yet. They're in the process of completing it, handing it to the President, who will then determine when and how it becomes public. So, Prof.
Thank you, Minister. The Minister has asked me to be very brief and only to give a sort of very high-level overview. So just a reminder, we were appointed a team of 6 in mid-December. We delivered an interim report to the President at the end of January. And as the Minister says, we're currently in the process of completing that. We'll submit that by the end of April, and that may be made public. So the President asked us essentially to do 3 things: to interrogate, firstly, Eskom's ability and capability to provide a secure and adequate electricity supply, so the whole security of electricity supply issue. He asked us to interrogate the issue of Eskom's financial sustainability. And thirdly, and I think this was very interesting, he said, look, we might and we're likely to solve the technical problems, and hopefully we will sort out Eskom's short-term financial difficulties. But how can we stop Eskom coming back again in 3 or 4 or 5 years for another bailout? So can we put the sector on a sustainable path going forward, and in particular respond to the kind of energy transition that's happening globally, and think about new business models and perhaps even restructuring for Eskom? So let me just summarize very briefly those 3 areas. So electricity security of supply. I think we all now in this room have a broad understanding of some of the reasons for load shedding, and you've heard them here today. Old kit breaks down more often. The new kit has design and construction defects. We haven't done enough maintenance at particular times. Poor coal quality, lack of diesel, etc., etc. But one of the issues which really struck us as the President's task team when we went into Eskom, and we had, by the way, excellent cooperation from both the chair and the executive and his team in providing data, was that probably the core issue, the core difficulty and challenge in Eskom at the moment is the issue of skills and capabilities. And Pandile highlighted this issue of leadership and people. And I want to emphasize a point that the Minister has made repeatedly over the last period, that we should not underestimate the impacts of state capture and SOE capture in hollowing out skills. Extraordinary disruption and undermining of governance systems at board level and at management level. But what we've seen in our investigations, just how deep that has run through the organization, and the extent to which skills have been hollowed out, the best people left, some of those who've been distracted by rent-seeking activities as well. And so this technical team that we've heard now reporting, one of our members on our team, Dr. Tsakani Ntombeni, is a co-convener with Ian on this, and it's an opportunity to drill down in much more detail than we were able to do. So sometimes people ask the respective roles of these teams. I think this is taking forward one area and really doing a deep dive in a very valuable one. There's a second aspect to this security of supply issue, which in a sense is beyond Eskom, because if Eskom's availability of plant is declining, and we are experiencing or have the threat of load shedding, then we also need to add new capacity to the system, and we need to start moving urgently to do that. So there are a whole set of recommendations in our report to the President around doing that. So the urgency of promulgating an updated IRP, launching a new IPP procurement process to accelerate investment that will complement Eskom's generation. And then freeing up the market for small-scale generation, less than 10 megawatts. There's a huge pipeline of investment and potential innovation that could make a massive difference if we made it easier, or perhaps even exempted the requirements for small plant to have generation licenses, or to simplify the registration process. So that's the first area, issue of security of supply. The second area is financial sustainability. And I think we also now realize, many of us, just how serious these challenges are. We've heard a bit about it today, but in essence, Eskom is not generating enough cash to cover its operations and to service its debt. In other words, what it's actually been doing in recent times is borrowing more money to pay the principal and the interest on its existing debt. So its debt levels are too high, they're unsustainable, and something has to give. Within our President's task team, we developed and commissioned an independent financial model. It's a forward-looking model. So we were able to assess in some detail the kind of financial interventions that are necessary to put Eskom on a sustainable path. And what became absolutely clear is no single intervention will solve the problem. So there's not a silver bullet, but there are three key interventions that could put Eskom on a sustainable footing. So the first, obviously, is generating more net revenue or more cash, and that has two components. Essentially, it's compressing costs on the one hand, and it's trying to get the revenue up. And we've seen the NERSA tariff increases. The analysis that we've done on our team and through our financial model would indicate that those tariff levels on their own are not sufficient to restore Eskom's financial sustainability. So that brings us to the second issue. So the one is cash, it's the income statement side of the equation. The other is debt on the balance sheet. And again, something has to give there. So we've seen in the budget speech, 23 billion rand a year, right? Not one-off, have been provisions have been made. But again, our financial modeling show that on its own, with those tariff levels that we have, will not be sufficient. And so there are discussions at the moment. A series of mechanisms are being explored around financial restructuring, some kind of debt relief structure, and hopefully there will be some announcements on this soon. So those are two more revenue or more cash, dealing with the balance sheet and debt, but we also need to deal with the cost of debt, because what's happening is, as Eskom retires debt, right, pays its principal, it's retiring its cheapest debt when it still had a credit rating 10 notches higher than it is now. In 10 years, we've seen Eskom's credit rating drop 10 notches. It used to be 3 notches into investment grade, it's 7 into junk territory. Its debt is very, very expensive. And so some kind of new kind of innovative financing facility is something that the team is looking at, a blended finance facility that could include some concessionary a component, maybe linked to climate financing, with other sources, could actually make a huge difference. So if we had those three together, we could see potentially Eskom returning to a more sustainable financial position. And then the third area, and it was really 2/3 of our terms of reference from the President, were around the medium and long-term sustainability of Eskom. In other words, as it responds to these extraordinary innovations that are happening globally around an energy transition, how is Eskom responding to be a more sustainable business? How will it get out of this potential utility death spiral? Is it able to develop a new business model? Should there be restructuring? And you would have seen that the recommendations of our team to establish 3 separate entities in Eskom was adopted and accepted by the Minister and the Cabinet, and there were announcements in the State of the Nation address and in the budget speech itself. So 3 entities, initial focus being on creating an independent grid and system operator. And I know there's been a lot of articles and papers in the paper by people with opinions on this, saying, will it make a difference? The view of the task team is that this is a transformational change for the future. It doesn't necessarily resolve all the immediate problems, but it puts the sector on a different trajectory in 2 respects. Running a generation business is very different to running a distribution business. Distribution business is customer-oriented, customer-facing. Generation is the kind of things that we've been hearing today, the kind of things that you've seen in your visit of Letaba. So separating these businesses out will have a very different kind of management focus, much more transparency around costs and potential to get efficiencies. But there's a second benefit, and I guess this is the most transformational, because if you have an independent grid with the system operator, and as the President said in his State of the Nation address, you combine with that entity also the planning and the procurement and the contracting functions, then you're creating a stable, transparent platform for contracting in a fair basis and a transparent basis, least cost power. In other words, we will accelerate more investment into the sector and that intergeneration, least cost generation that will complement the efforts that Eskom is making itself. I think I'll end there. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much. So